Hi, this is Praios and I'm a professional gambler. Streaming from you to you from the beach. Yeah, just joking. This obviously is a green screen, but yeah. Today's topic will be expert exploits the loose opponent. I think that's probably not that expert, this content, but it might still be able to help you. I didn't watch it yet. You probably can tell because I can't judge yet. It's the almighty Phil Galfond who's making this video, so let's hope that we all can learn something from it. And yeah, I obviously will also give my opinion to the things he says. And yeah, let's see what is going on.
We've all found ourselves on the river after betting flop and turn with a busted draw, asking ourselves, why did we bet against this guy? He's never folding flop and turn. Today I want to talk to you about how we adjust to that type of opponent.
I mean, it could make sense. I mean, even the loose people fold sometimes. And if the draw is so big that you have an equity edge against the range of your opponent, it could make sense still to bet the flop and turn with a draw. I mean, once you hit and you have many outs, you don't need much fold equity anymore. If when your draws come in, you will also get paid out. So yeah, you get the reasoning what I'm trying to say.
And when we do find ourselves on the river, what we do from there.
Just nice.
Hey everybody, Phil here. Today we're going to talk about adjusting to a very loose opponent or sticky opponent. Now, I like to be specific when I define.
I think the video could have ended already, because if someone is very loose, not folding, staying in the way too many hands, the counter strategy is to not bluff anymore or bluff very little, and also to value bet more thinly and extract the most value from the guy. So let's see what he has to add to this. So normally the video would end here.
Find these types of opponents, and you should be too when you're making reads, because loose is a very general term. You know, a loose opponent could be somebody who plays too many hands pre-flop, could be somebody who plays too many hands pre-flop and then calls the flop, but then starts folding the turn. Or it could be somebody who, plays reasonably pre-flop, plays reasonably on the flop, but then by the time they get to the river, never folds a pair. The way you adjust to each of those opponents is very different. Today, we're going to talk about adjusting to a player who is reasonable pre-flop, or kind of anything pre-flop, but specifically too loose on the flop and too loose on the turn. This opponent is, floating flop with just too much junk, anything that has kind of any hope. And then, it's not somebody who you're going to get to fold a pair on the turn, or get to fold like a reasonable draw with some showdown value. Or actually,
we should also say how he's playing on the river, because if he's on the river all of a sudden overfolding, it could be massively profitable to 3-barrel. But let's listen what he says.
Actually, like any kind of reasonable draw. Some aspects of adjusting to this opponent are kind of obvious. So let's start with those. We don't want to bluff flop nearly as much. Basically, this opponent is calling too much, so our bluffs are losing EV. It's that simple. And the same thing is true on the turn. So do we still want to
bluff less, value bet more? That's what I said.
Start like semi-bluffs with pretty good hands? Yeah, probably. Unless this opponent is just literally never folding. Semi-bluffs, especially with like a reasonably high equity draw, they have the benefit of course, this opponent sometimes is going to whiff the flop and fold. And even when they don't, we've built a pot where we can hit a big hand on the turn or river and then put in a big bet. So I wouldn't shy away from betting your strong flush draws and your open enders and things like that, at least on the flop. Now, if you bet,
looks also like we are talking hold'em here, although he's primarily a PLO player nowadays.
Bet flop on like a, let's say, king 7 deuce with 2 hearts board, and you have queen jack of hearts, turns an offsuit 4. Now I think checking turn makes sense. Some opponents are gonna, have check called flop with a pocket pair.
Another question: are we in position or out of position? Do we getting a free cut or not? That's also making a difference here.
7 and then fold, but this opponent is somebody who's probably not going to fold those hands on the turn. So actually, all we're getting this opponent to fold, other than some random ace highs, is actually weaker flush draws that we would like to keep in. So
I think this type of opponent is not folding a flush draw ever, by the way. So weaker flush draws also don't fold. I mean, at least in my experience with guys like
Yeah,
this.
start semi-bluffing on the flop with good semi-bluff hands, skip the bad semi-bluff hands, and once you get to the turn, do some hand reading. On a board like 10-7 deuce with two hearts, well, now if this opponent's, let's say, check called a small bet, they might have a lot of just like king, queen of spades with the backdoor flush draw. So when the turn comes, the offsuit four.
You could also have way more junk, like 8-9, Jack-9, Jack-8, all these gut short things. 9-6, 8-6. I think that's about it. All the flush draws. Deuce, 7, maybe even ace high. Something like ace jack, ace queen, which you're not folding on the flop. So potentially a lot of things that he at least could fold by the river, but yeah.
Now they actually have some things that can fold. Whereas on the other example I gave, king 7.
Yes, okay, that's actually right. Here we can fold all the guard shots. But yeah, on the other one, it was less draw, I think, and then he probably still continues with most of the things on the turn.
Deuce, they basically have ace high, a pair, or a flush draw. So do some hand reading. But generally, like you can widen your value range across all streets. I wouldn't go too crazy with this because what ends up happening, you basically just end up with, well, you end up building big pots sometimes with hands that you're uncomfortable with and not sure what to do by the time you get to the river. That said, this is a great opponent to make some two-street value plays against. So let's say it's board is 10-9, 6, and it turns to 3, and there's a flush draw on the flop. Like basically any 10x can bet twice, and then you're gonna have to check a lot of rivers because it's gonna be an overcard, it's gonna bring a straight, it's gonna bring a flush, whatever.
Okay, it seems like he assumes that we are out of position for this. I would bet flop, bet turn for sure with a 10. Maybe even with a 9. And on the river, I think on the river I would check call a lot, hoping that he is bluffing with busted draws. At least if no draw comes in.
The case may be, or even if it doesn't, like it's starting to get too thin with 10-8 or whatever. 10-8. But definitely go for those two streets. You can go for two big streets sometimes too. Like jacks is a great hand to bet big on the turn, get called by every pair plus straight draw, etc. And then
if you are in position and river blanks, you probably could even bet the 10 again for value. I mean, your opponent, as he's loose, he might have a 9, a 6, pocket 7s, whatever, which he assumes that he might be good with still as all the draws bricked, for example.
On a lot of rivers, it starts to get too thin. If this opponent plays kind of reasonably on the river, what's going to happen is they're going to get to the river with so many weak hands that they have to overfold the river. That's usually what you're going to see.
I have good filters so that you don't hear the wind. But yeah, no drink currently. Although, I got a bottle of water with me. Here it is.
See, sometimes, of course, and again, know your opponent. Sometimes a player who's loose on the flop and on the turn is still just really stubborn and loose on the river too, even though they've gotten there with a weak range. But for now, I want to make the assumption that this player's loose on the flop and turn, kind of peeling with any hope of winning the hand.
I think the described player type actually often feels too loose on flop and turn, but might fold quite a bit on the river. So against these described opponent types, it's often not too bad to fire 3 times. And often it's even the better line to fire 3 times than 2 times. At least that's what I would generalize say about the player type he's describing.
Really wants to win the hand, but now once they face a river
What do you think, Rob?
bet, if they have a weak holding, they tend to fold. So the key here is when you get to the river with your potential bluffs, you have to follow it through. Now I want to talk about a mistake in logic that I see a lot of players make, even good players. And I've actually had conversations with players where they've said this to me, and I've said, actually, no, that's not how it works. So oftentimes, when players are up against people who they think are calling the turn a lot to then fold the river, they like to bluff turn because they're building a pot, and then they get to bluff river, and then that opponent folds, too often on the river. The problem is, let's say, just hypothetically, we are potting turn and potting river to make the math a little bit easier. What people kind of intuitively feel like is, okay, well, if my opponent is folding to a pot bet over half the time on the river, then I just want to increase the pot because I'm going to win it more than half the time. That's not how the math works out, because let's say we get
He's right so far.
to the turn and the pot is $100. When we bet $100 on the turn, and then $300 into $300 on the river, we're actually risking $400 to win $200 because we're saying they're going to call the turn. Let's just say they call every time on the turn. Now we've put in 100, they've put in 100. That's how the pot gets to 300. And yes, on the river, you're betting 300 into 300. And if you win more than half the time, that's enough. But actually, the way that you got the pot to 300 is you kind of wasted $100.
I think against many players, they just starting to feel the pressure when the big bets start. And yeah, pre-flop is cheap. Flop and turn is also sort of cheap, and they can still improve, more cards to come. But on the river, you can really put on the pressure. And that's also, like, I feel myself. I mean, bluffing flop and turn, quite easy, not risking that much. But these 3-barrel river bluffs are very expensive, and you risk a lot. And you are very stubborn to put in the third bet. And it's the same for your opponent, who is like, oh man, I got some junk and he's betting again, so now I might have to fold. So that's how I feel, at least.
To contribute to that pot on the turn. So that the way the actual math works out is you're risking 400 to win 200 on the river if they're never folding the turn. So you need them to fold 67% of the time on the river or more. Now, in actuality, nobody's 100% call on the turn, so adjust the math accordingly. But don't get caught in the trap of thinking, okay, this guy, he's folding 58% of rivers, so let's just inflate the pot and bounce away, so I can just bluff him on the river. That just about does it, though. So too loose on flop or turn. The way that you're going to make your money is from value betting. You widen your value range a little bit.
It's actually, like I said in the beginning, value bet more, bluff less. That's all we learned here. We could have ended instantaneous after like 30 seconds. Seems like. I mean, at least his explanation about free barreling when you're on the turn was good, and some people might not know how the mathematics work. So we learned a bit more. I mean, I knew already, but you might have learned some more.
And you got to reduce your bluff frequency. So basically, even if you didn't widen your value range, your opponent's strategy just makes you money when you have good hands that we're already going to value bet. That's where all the money comes to you. And the way that you lose that money back to this opponent is if you bluff too much, or you bluff even as much as you were going to, because that's where they take the money from you. So the way to do it, even if you don't want to widen your value range too much, just take the money when you have the value bets, and don't waste the money when you have your bluffs. Good luck. If you have any types of opponents in mind who give you a lot of trouble,
if you play against the loosest, not folding type of opponent, I think it even makes sense to stop bluffing completely, because these guys are just folding never, basically. Just wait until you have a hand and then value town them so hard. Like smash 3 streets for value with middle pair or something. I mean, middle pair might be a bit too loose, but yeah, top pair should definitely be enough. By the way, seems like this is the end of the video. This is more beginner type content, but maybe you got something out of it. And yeah, Forgot to mention, I got another channel now too, Finance with Excel it's called. One video, by the way, is blowing up. It's about Luna, and I think it's a Ponzi scheme. And yeah, 1.5k viewers already. For such a small channel, that's a lot. Yeah, definitely check that out. Yeah, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, all these good things. Yeah, bye-bye until next time.